Thank you. We are going to start this very important session on a topic that I think that Professor Mohamed Behnassi will introduce us to the concept. As I mentioned that, here there is, here we are warmer than here. So if you see us just with some problems, the water just falling down on our face, don't worry, because the situation here is warmer than here with that. So we are going to talk about a very important topic, which is human security related to climate change. Is everything okay? Yeah. So which is a key topic now, and it will be a topic in the future, but not in long term, but in the short and medium term. And we're going to talk about climate emergency, human security at the center of the climate emergency on the road of the COP27. As you know, in 2 weeks, or else there will be the COP27 in Egypt. So where all the international community will meet to let's hope to make some steps forward in terms of climate change policies. But here we are going to talk about the topic of human security, and we're going to talk about this topic with Dr. Mohamed Behnassi. I think that I pronounced it correctly. Yeah. Thank you. She's a full professor at the Zor University of Agadir, and director of CERES, which is the Center for Environment, Human Security and Governance. The areas of expertise of Mohamed Behnassi include international law and politics of environment, environmental policy, climate change policy, and human security. He has published so far 15 books and 40 scientific papers, and made more than a lot of presentation, international conference. So he has served also as expert at IPBES, which is the International Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and also MedECC, and then I will refer to MedECC, and also at the National Council for Research, for Scientific and Technological Research in Morocco. And Professor Mohamed Behnassi is also an independent senior auditor on corporate social responsibility, if I'm not mistaken. And as I mentioned before, he has been involved in MedECC. MedECC. I don't know how many of you already know MedECC. You, okay? MedECC is I think that you should know. It's important that you know MedECC. MedECC is an open platform of scientists from all around the world working on climate and environmental change in the Mediterranean. It's an open platform. That means there is no link with, let's say, any political institution. But it is supported by the Union for the Mediterranean, the United Nations Environmental Programme for the Environment through the Plan Bleu. It is also supported by the government of France, the government of Monaco, the government of Catalonia, but this government only support the group, only try to finance it. But at the end, MedECC is the scientists that work in a voluntary basis for MedECC. They advise, they give their recommendations, their insights to everyone, to all governments, to all society for free, with the idea with the goal of the aim of giving sound and rigorous information for preparing the process of decision making. And they offer, at the end, they are putting all the information on the table of the decision makers. So Professor Behnassi, as I told you before, participated in MedECC, and he was a lead author of a chapter of MAR1. MAR1 is the first assessment report on the environmental and climatic change in the Mediterranean. And in the MAR1 there is a chapter on human security, and Professor Behnassi was a lead author of this chapter together with Dr. Antonietta Elia, Manolis Grilakis, and Dr. Ethekam Turhan from Turkey. So he's a very good expert on this. He's an excellent expert on human security, and I think that this afternoon we are going to learn about the concept, but also about how human security should be in the center of all policies in this new area in the context of the planetary emergency. Finally, a last remark. I think that for today is a very important day. I don't know if you have listened or you have read the newspaper that today the Lancet Countdown has launched its report on climate and health in Europe. It is it's one of these platforms with some scientists just putting sound knowledge and clear recommendations on the agenda of policymakers. And the results of this report that has been published today and that will be presented here on next Friday, all the information contained in this report is really very worrying. So we are climate change and environment is already affecting our health and our security, and it's not. And now we have facts, we have numbers, we have figures that put this situation on the table. So I think that I've talked for more than I was expected to do. So I am going to give the floor to Professor with the with a first question, which is, what is human security? Could you help us to understand what human security means, and then how climate change is affecting human security, especially in the Mediterranean area? It's a very short question, and it needs to be a very long answer, but we have 10 minutes, so it's a challenge. But I think that it's clear, and we need to know, or you need to know, what is human security, how it relates to climate change, and then how climate change is affecting human security in the Mediterranean. So, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Arno, for this introduction, which is really stimulating. I am very happy to be with you tonight to discuss about a topic which is now universal. It's not anymore something that concerns one region, and the others maybe are not concerned in a way or another. But now it is a universal challenge that should be managed according to its scope and also magnitude. But let me first thank the organizers for inviting me to speak tonight about this topic. The IOMED, with whom I have a very fruitful collaboration for many years. And I appreciate their openness to scholars and experts from other regions other than the northern Mediterranean countries. This is a signal that they are aware that thinking and reflecting about shared issues should be inclusive. and should include others' thoughts, perspectives about shared challenges. And this is maybe different from the past when the North produce ideas, produce concepts, responses, and export it to other countries. Now there is a paradigm shift, and especially when it comes to environmental and climate risks and different other subjects linked to these risks. We need others' perspectives, thought, practices, knowledge, because it is useful in a way or another to build resilience against this kind of shifting dynamics. So by reference to your question, human security is a concept that has been produced in mid-90s by United Nations, especially the United Nations Development Program. But so far, in my opinion, this concept didn't manage to become a reference for decisions, for policy making at different scales of governance, compared to other concepts like sustainable development, human rights. There is a gap, even if personally I consider human security paradigm as an adapted reference to think about the emerging challenges. I mean, environmental and climate changes. First of all, because human security is a form of security that places humans at the center of everything. That means when we consider human security as an imposing paradigm for policy making, we give priority to humans. And we think firstly about making humans live in very comfortable situations, well-being, secure conditions, etc., etc. And to free humans from fear, from wants, and everything that impact their resilience and their capacity to manage shocks, risks, etc. In the past, many countries give priority to national security. And national security is a concept which is linked more or less to external risks to domestic security. But now security is affected by domestic risks and drivers of instability. And I came from a country where this kind of things are now tangible. That means we are living this kind of situations. I can give you just an example. This year, Morocco is experiencing for the first time in its history the worst water insecurity. And this is linked more or less to climate change, but also to some misuse of water resources by many sectors like agriculture, tourism, etc. But climate change is a driver of human insecurity, and the example of water insecurity is a really very clear example. So in many parts of Morocco, people are losing their livelihoods, their sources of revenues. Many activities are now impossible because they are linked to natural resources that are vulnerable to climate risks. So people try to face this new shifting dynamics by many kind of responses. For instance, many of them move to other cities or to other countries if they have the possibility. Others try to stay in their lands or in different parts of Morocco, but sometimes they can engage in some illicit or illegal activities just to compensate the loss of revenues. Rural-urban migration is becoming a new dynamic, and this is creating new burden on big cities, especially on the peripheries of the cities. So people don't have enough opportunities, for instance, job opportunities or safety net opportunities, etc. So it's a new form of vulnerability that is created directly by climate change, which manifests itself through, for instance, the reduction of precipitations, extreme events like flooding, like the increase of temperature. For instance, many touristic areas in Morocco are not anymore touristic areas because of the increase of temperature. Tourists are not anymore able to cope with this increase in temperature. Some pastoralists in Morocco are now in conflict with farmers and with residents because of the shortage of grazing. So they try to adapt by changing their routes and by looking for water, and this creates tension on available resources. So climate change is affecting the sustainability of territories, of resources, creating water scarcity, and amplifying existing tensions or creating new ones. So the example of Morocco is not unique because there are many African countries and countries in MENA region that are suffering almost the same dynamics. So we are in a situation where we can speak about kind of discontinuities in terms of resource availability, in terms of livelihoods, in terms of the capacity of populations to secure their homes, the access to water, the access to food, the access to some natural resources that are used for, in their economic activities, etc. Young people, for instance, in rural areas, are not anymore interested by agriculture or farming because it's becoming very difficult to use land for farming. It's not anymore a viable activity. Okay, so young people are trying to look for other job opportunities or other kind of incomes. And in some African countries, they even can join some criminal or terrorist organization because they can offer them opportunities, some sources of livelihoods, and also food, health services. And it's like new actors that are emerging in this highly climate vulnerable regions, just to compensate or to play the role of state in securing people and territories. So these shifting dynamics maybe are not so visible to countries in the north, because climate change in the northern countries are more or less the affair of the country, of the government. Okay, and I have even recently read that climate change in most developed countries, it's a military issue. For instance, we have created many military institutions to deal with climate change just because climate change is affecting the military operations, infrastructure, and the capacity to organize their military operations. So citizens in northern countries are not, in my opinion, so affected by climate change compared to people or citizens in southern countries, especially in Africa and the MENA region. But currently, I think that some new impact, or maybe not new impact, but some impact that's become visible in Europe, like the increase in water insecurity or in temperatures, etc., especially during the last years. People start to speak about climate change as a challenge, not because it is the challenge for others, but it is a challenge also for Western countries. And I could see that in some movements that call for proactive climate action in northern countries. I can feel that many young people, many researchers start to consider climate change as a huge challenge also for Western countries, because it can affect their economic model, the continuity of their welfare and well-being in the future. And this new reflection about climate change in the Western countries is also indirectly linked to the impact of climate change on non-Western countries. For instance, Morocco is known by its potential in exporting agriculture product to Europe. Now, with the water insecurity in Morocco, the country will not be able to continue doing the same. So it can affect also the availability of some agricultural products in EU markets. The southern Mediterranean countries are suffering a lot from climate change that can create some new social dynamics with some negative impacts on the Mediterranean, especially when it comes to displacements and new forms of migration and the imperative to secure borders against some induced risks or generated risks by this kind of this new kind of migration. In terms of literature, many researchers try to reflect on climate change as a security challenge. And there is what we call the initial generation of researchers who consider climate change as a security issue, and it should be managed according to this aspect. That means climate change can affect the security landscape, and potential responses should be based on this perception of climate change as a security issue. This is what we call the securitization of climate change. But there is also another trend which is not proactive. That means which try to consider climate change as just a factor among others. It can sometimes be amplifying some existing tensions, some existing risks, but in itself, if we isolate it, it's not a security issue. Why? Because so far we don't have sufficient empirical evidence that prove that climate change can trigger, for instance, violent conflict or insecurity issues, etc. In most cases, climate change combined with other factors can generate this outcome, but in itself, it's not sufficient. I can give you an example. There are some studies which focused on the case of Syria or the Lake of Chad or the Sahel, which consider, for instance, climate change as a driver of terrorism, of displacement and conflict. But these case studies, which are more or less very localized, couldn't generate robust evidence, scalable, that can orient policymaking in the future. So far we have many case studies that are context specific, but we need more research to understand the responsibility, the clear or the responsibility of climate change behind the different dynamics I have mentioned. So there is a knowledge gap in this area, but we have to be careful. This knowledge gap shouldn't be an excuse to postpone actions against climate change. So the first reason is that climate change can have direct effect on some aspect of a human security. For instance, climate change can cause resource scarcity. And the resource scarcity can be a driver of livelihood insecurity. People can lose their livelihoods, can lose their lands because of extreme events like flooding, like other kind of extreme events. And this can push many people to take decisions as adaptation decisions. So adaptation decisions vary according to cultural context, political context, the existing incentives, for instance, to maintain the links between people and the land, or to migrate to other regions, etc., etc. So climate change can have direct effect on some aspect of a human security. And climate change can also have indirect effect on many aspects of human security. So in both cases, climate change is responsible of some effect on human security. So researchers in both trends recognize that climate change is responsible in different ways. So in most cases, they recommend some what we call no-regret measures or responses that can be taken immediately because the medium or long-term effect will be positive in most cases. For instance, climate vulnerable countries can invest in development, okay? Can invest in building resilience, can invest in inclusion, because adaptation and resilience is based also on inclusion, democracy, human rights, recognizing, for instance, local knowledge, gender approach, etc. So when we invest in this, the outcome will be very positive, whether it is linked to climate change or not. And there is also other pathways to react when we speak about climate change and human security. Human security covers many forms of securities. We can give some examples because when we link it to climate change, some kind of or some forms of securities should be given priority, especially in the southern Mediterranean countries. Water insecurity, food insecurity should be given priority in these countries. Why? And I can even give priority to food security, because this form of security can trigger many risk dynamics, and the existing empirical evidence shows that in many countries food insecurity can generate in cascade many other risks. Food insecurity was behind many unrest in the MENA region in the last decade, and so far people with this kind of vulnerability are prepared to go further, to take decisions, many kinds of decisions. And in Morocco, for instance, I remember the King Hassan II, one of the European journalists gave him a question. When in the morning, what is the first information you try to look for? He said, the weather. He said, why? He said, because my people, when they are not hungry, they are in peace. That means the weather means more precipitations, means more agricultural production, and as a consequence, the domestic food security is okay. There is no problem in this area, and it can impact positively the political and social stability of the country. So he said that he gave this response in a moment when climate change wasn't a global issue. By the end of the 80s, even before 1992, the Rio conference. So this kind of perception can be applied to many countries now. If you secure people, you secure food for people, you can prevent many subsequent risks. Okay, and when we say food, implicitly we are speaking about water. And when we say food, water, we are speaking about health security. So the human security components are interlinked. And climate change has the quality to affect all these forms of securities in interdependent way. That means when we speak about policy or policies in the area of climate, resilience or adaptation, this should be comprehensive. It should be designed in integrated ways. That means if we focus on one area and we neglect others, that means we can even create new risks for the other areas of human security. So in terms of governance, governing the climate human security nexus needs a shift in the way we design and implement policies. We should reflect in a transversal way, in an integrated way, and this calls for a new way of articulating actors at different scales of governance, from the international and local scales. If, for instance, national security is can be monopolized by the military or some decision makers at high rank, human security should be managed by all actors in inclusive way, by the citizen until the last decision maker. And this is more or less incompatible with the level of democracy, with the level of human rights promotion and inclusion and gender consideration in the southern Mediterranean countries. If we don't invest in this direction, it will be difficult to manage climate issues with its links to human security. Because you know Morocco, we are still in democratization transition, and the transition is becoming the norm. You know, so for instance, even if Morocco has adopted the constitution of the 2011 constitution, which is a very advanced constitution in the MENA region and Africa, but in terms of implementation, we still suffer from many shortages, many constraints. So you see, I am linking some non-climate issues, non-climate consideration with climate and human security. They are linked.
Right. Thank you for this. You hear me? For the first this first introduction. Believe me, I think that also in the north of the Mediterranean, we are discovering that we are fragile in terms of climate change. I mean, especially this summer, we have discovered that we were, I mean, everywhere in all European countries, we have had water shortage. You know, and I think that for me, this summer, the positive, my positive message from last summer and this post-summer, because we are still we don't know if we are in summer or in fall, because it's. But the main message from this situation is that all European countries, including the northern countries, have realized that they are fragile, because at the end we thought that in the Mediterranean, normally the problem was in the Mediterranean. So for instance, in the formulation of the European directives, there was always the situation that the discussion or tension between the central and northern countries and the southern countries in terms of water, etc. And it was always a problem. I mean, this is a problem of the southern countries, so this will not affect us. So there was, let's say, a focus from the Nordic and the Central European countries. Their vision was completely different from the south, and now they are discovering that when we talk about water shortage some years ago, it was not it wasn't a joke. When we talk about the problems with let's say the food crisis linked to climate change, linked to water, it wasn't a joke, because now they are suffering from all this, including France. France, one of the the nuclear a country with the nuclear with powers. How to say I'm looking to you. How do you say the nuclear plant? I mean, now they have discovered there is corrosion in the plant, and then that they cannot refrigerate the plants because there is no water in the rivers, and the water is warmer than it was before. So there is an enormous problem. So at the end, I think that, and it's hard to say that it's positive, but the positive side of the situation is that we are discovering the insecurity linked to climate change. And perhaps the question for me would be, do you think that putting human security in the center of all policies could help us, who could help governments at all levels and society to move forward to a more, let's say, how do you say, a more brave or more ambitious climate policies. I mean, because at the end, now we are affecting people. We are talking about people, about food, about the fundamentals of society. So do you think that if we put human security in the center, perhaps we are going to get positive reactions and transformative shifts from governments, or not?
Okay, thank you. Let me first add one information, because it makes difference between the north and the south. Mm-hmm. In the south, most people are, in the meantime, victim of climate change, mm-hmm. and the first responders to climate change. In the north, mm-hmm. we can say that ecosystems and populations are starting to be affected by climate change, okay? And the impacts start to be visible, okay. Mm-hmm. both to populations and to decision makers, compared to the past. Mm-hmm. But there is still a gap in terms of vulnerability, in terms of exposure, in terms of the kinds of risks, mm-hmm. between the north and the south. By referring to your second question, we know that there are many challenges that are at the heart of some policies, but in terms of impact, there is a certain gap. Okay, and before speaking about climate issues and human security, let me refer to environmental issues. Mm-hmm. We all of us know that from 1972, the first World Conference on Environment in Stockholm, mm-hmm. we have adopted some decisions to go ahead. 1992, we have adopted many conventions and declarations. Many countries around the world adopted many policies, constitutions, where we can find some articles or dispositions linked to environment sustainability. And mm-hmm. But in terms of impact, there is a gap, because the global environment is suffering. Forms of pollutions are becoming worse, like, for instance, plastic pollution. Mm-hmm. Resource scarcity and also overexploitation of natural resources is the norm. So there is a gap between what we adopt as norms, policies, and so on, and the impact we are looking for. So I think if we don't change the way we govern these issues, even if we adopt climate policies at all levels, maybe we can keep a gap between what we want to do and what is being done on the ground. So climate change and human security, in my opinion, call for a new way of making policies and implementing policies. Okay, that means we have to the first thing to do, in my opinion, is to develop our perception of climate risks, mm-hmm. and their links to different forms of security or development or whatever. So in many countries, their perceptions of climate risks are still more or less in a gap if we compared them with the existing literature. For instance, you know that the IPCC is publishing many assessments in cyclic way, mm-hmm. but there is a gap between what is published by IPCC, the output of IPCC, and also our perceptions and also the decisions made at all levels. Okay, there is a gap. So this gap, in my opinion, is linked to our perception of the risk. And there are many scientists who compared the climate crisis with COVID-19 crisis. And they found a huge gap between the ways we have managed the COVID-19 crisis and the way we are managing climate crisis. It's not a question of resources. It's not questions of our ability to do or not to do. But I think our perceptions of the two risks are not the same. For instance, I can give another example. The current war have pushed many countries to provide some support in different forms. Mm-hmm. Climate change is still not an area which mobilize the superpowers, which mobilize offenders. It is mobilizing scientists, it is mobilizing civil society actors around the world, it is mobilizing some business actors, but it is not mobilizing the centers of power who have the centers who have the financial power, who have the decision power at the global level. So I think if we change the perception, our perceptions about climate risks and their links with human security, maybe it will be a first start to go ahead. The second point I want to discuss, beyond perception, is our capacity to consider climate change as a survival issue. In my opinion, it should be considered as a survival issue. Why? Because in the past, we used to consider it as an environmental issue like others. And based on this way of considering climate change, we behaved during the COPs or at domestic levels, etc. To confirm this, let's take the mitigation potential of developed countries. Even if developed countries know very clearly that to stop climate change, we should revise our development model and take robust decision in terms of cutting emissions, because this is the main action to be made. Mm-hmm. Even if we adapt to climate change and we continue emitting the same quantities of carbons, we are just making the monster bigger. Okay, so we have to cut our emissions. So far, there is a huge gap between the Paris Agreement's objectives and the nationally determined contributions of countries and the mitigation potential. So you can see that there is a huge gap between what should be done. Everyone now has an idea about the goals, objectives, and the deadlines and the tipping points, etc., etc. But in terms of action, there is a gap. This gap is affecting also developing countries, because these countries have some specific needs. For them, what is more important is to face climate risks and to build their resilience through, for instance, adaptation, development, fostering human security, etc. So they need resources to do that, because adaptation is very costly. And there is a report published by the United Nations Development Program, who mentioned that the cost of adaptation are increasing, and in in the coming years, many countries in the south will be unable to satisfy their needs in terms of adaptation. So the north is invited to make promising actions in terms of funding. Mm-hmm. So this is a traditional principle linked to climate justice, because the north is considered historically as the responsible over climate change, even if now there are many actors joining the landscape, like China, India, Brazil, etc. But in terms of climate justice, the north has to correct the current situation and look forward to engage the newcomers.
I have the feeling that we, and when I say we, I mean governments and civil society, we have not understood anything about climate change. I mean, we have been climate change. Well, yeah, it was a topic. Okay, some years ago we said, in some generations we're going to see the changes, but now change is here. There's an acceleration of change. And the issue is that there isn't a clear understanding of how climate change as amplifier of other current trends will really affect our lives, our daily lives. I have this feeling. I mean, for instance, in terms of, I'm going to give you an example. For a long time, we have been working on non-satisfactory biodiversity policies. I mean, governments developed, let's say, biodiversity policies just because we need to manage the environment and nature, etc. So we protected some areas, but at the end we are losing not only biodiversity, but the most important thing, which are the ecosystemic services. You know, the services that nature provides us. This means water, the capacity of producing food, pollination, for instance. So at the end, we have an enormous crisis, because we have been working on environmental policies after Stockholm. So we have been working during 50 years on climate policies, etc. We have developed a lot of regulation, etc. But the fundamentals of, of the environmental support to our life is really affected.
It's compromised. Compromised.
And now, at the end, we have realized, or some part of society has realized, that we are just, we are out of the planetary boundaries. I mean, we are out of the limits. And the problem is that now, let's say, going out of this limit, of these planetary boundaries, is affecting our health, our food, our everything. The issue is how. I don't know if government will be able to say, okay, let's put the focus on this, and let's put human security. The security of people, and it means food, water, security, at the center, in order to convince all actors, all players, that we need to react. It's to see the practical effects of climate and environmental change to people, and by doing this, being able to make this revolution in terms of policies. If we continue by saying we need to reduce, we need to change how our transportation system, we need to make a lot of changes because there is an impact on the environment, we're not going to succeed. If we say come on, if we don't make these changes, we are going to have our survival is at risk, then perhaps we are going to have all players that say, yes. I mean, it's how we put the focus, no? And perhaps human security can help us. Yeah. Because what I see in the past, if we look to the human history, we see many cases where civilizations have disappeared because of the effects.
Human insecurity.
Is it true or not?
Human insecurity, yes.
Do you think that we can learn from the past?
Yeah. For instance, there are many civilizations which have disappeared or had disappeared just because of water insecurity. There are many examples, and the human security chapters we have documented this. Yes, yeah. And let me seize the opportunity to discuss a little bit about the work being done by MedECC and the EPES, because it is in line with your reflection. The Mediterranean Environmental and Climate Change Expert Network, MedECC, is now working on 3 special reports based on the MAR1, the first assessment report. And the MedECC, as already mentioned by my colleague, is like the IPCC, but for the Mediterranean. It is working with the same guidelines, the same procedures, etc. And it is doing really a very great job, because it is providing evidence to many actors, policymakers, all actors that can use this evidence to take further action. And it is context specific. That means it is complementary with the IPCC work, but it is focused on the Mediterranean. One of these 3 special reports is about the within Nexus: water, energy, food, and ecosystem Nexus. And this special report, which will be released by the end of 2023, is being shaped according to this perspective. That means behind the report there is human security and climate change. Okay, even if we don't speak directly about human security. But in this report, what is really fantastic is that we discovered during the scoping assessment that the 4 areas of the Nexus, water, energy, food, and ecosystems, are highly interdependent. We can't go on managing these areas in silos independently, because this may create trade-offs for other sectors of the Nexus. So within this chapter, we tried first to define this Nexus within the Mediterranean area. What does it mean by the within Nexus in the Mediterranean? And the question is really philosophical and very substantive, because when you move to other regions, for example, like Asia, Latin America, or North, the Nexus may have other meanings, other ramifications. But in the Mediterranean, we discovered that, according to available literature, that the Nexus is highly relevant for future policy making in the area of climate change and human security. The other parts of the report will focus on drivers, impact, and the governance issues. The last chapter is focusing on governance, because we believe that a good governance of the Nexus in the future can be leverage for change. And the governance here is not perceived just as policy making, but we are perceiving governance as a system which is based on multi-scale. It's a multi-scale system. It's multi-actor system, and also multidisciplinary and so on. So it's like we, implicitly in the report, we are also shifting in terms of our perception of governance system. And the second report is also linked to human security and climate change. Is about the climate migration nexus in the Mediterranean. It is really a very promising report.
It's also a report on coastal areas.
Yeah, the third one. So this is a dynamic being done in MedECC. And there is a similar work being done on a global level by the EPES, the International Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. They are focusing almost on the same nexus, but they decided to add the health component to the nexus to address health as different components, because COVID-19 has taught us that health security can be undermined, endangered by our inability to govern environmental and climate issues in the future. That's why health should be managed in the future according to new perception. That means placing health at the center of a large nexus, not just a medical perception of the health. So this two kind of works being done now are joining your reflection. Because human security is based on a natural foundation. If we lose connection with this natural foundation, which is ecosystems, services provided by ecosystems, and also the identity of humans are linked to their connection with nature. If you isolate them with nature, that means their identity will be incomplete. And in many regions, especially of Africa and MENA region, we discovered that we have to reconnect with nature, with ecosystems, and to conserve their ability to provide services and the foundation for human societies.
I think it's time for opening the floor to the audience. And perhaps we're going to lose a point, which is migration at global scale, because it will be also a topic now, but we can stay here until 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, because now I remember an article just published this summer in The Guardian that say, Europe, be prepared, because climate change will be there will be a massive migration from the south of the Mediterranean to the north because of climate change and all the problems in terms of food, water, scarcity, etc. And Europe is just putting walls, closing the doors, instead of preparing this change of paradigm. And I was 2 weeks ago in a conference about the European values, how we keep the European values, the values that are behind, the fundamentals of Europe. Our population, our society will change. Will change. If this migration, this large-scale migration is real, everything will change. So at the end, there are many, many points that we could start just talking, but let's give the floor to the audience. And I see one person there. Endavant. Si es potser el micròfon. Sí. Perdó, que hi ha alguna coseta... No. Jo crec que és el micròfon que no està encès. La tecnologia sempre ajuda, menys quan falla.
Molt bé, gràcies. Ara sí. Bé, hi ha un tòpic molt popular que diu que som massa gent al món. I afegeix una cosa. Som massa gent al món.
Sí? Funcionem? Sí? Provem-ho? Sí, continuï, segueixi.
Bé, hi ha un tòpic que diu això, que som massa gent al món i que això inevitablement portarà a guerres que eliminaran milions de persones. Això és molt popular, sentim. Jo no hi estic d'acord, sobretot la segona part, que és la part cruel de dir que es morin milions de persones perquè siguin uns altres com nosaltres. Però una consideració i una pregunta que és una juguesca.
No, un moment.
No se sent?
Un moment, que és que hi havia un problema... Ens en sortirem, Ens en sortirem. No, hi havia un tema de traducció, però no patiu. Si estem intentant lluitar contra el canvi climàtic i tot plegat, ens hem de sortir amb aquest tema de traducció. Sí? Tornem a provar?
Si aquest senyor traduint és una meravella.
Sí? Tornem a repetir la pregunta perquè el professor...
El tòpic diu, som massa gent al planeta...
Yeah, I think it works. Un moment.
Funciona o no funciona?
Fem-ho bé.
Vinga, tornem.
Comptem a 0. Temps mort.
1, 2, 3.
Yes, let's start. Va.
Un tòpic diu, som massa gent al món i això durarà inevitablement a guerres que ha d'eliminar milions de persones. La segona part és molt cruel perquè sempre se suposa que han de morir uns altres i no nosaltres. Però hauran sentit aquest tòpic. Aquí hi ha una part demogràfica que a mi m'interessa d'això i volia al final fer una pregunta com una juguesca. És a dir, les situacions demogràfiques en principi són molt desiguals. Per exemple, tothom imagina que les multituds estan a l'Índia, però la gent no sap que a Holanda la densitat de població és igual que la de l'Índia. Però, clar, la imatge és aquesta. Vull dir, els poblats són nosaltres, o la població del Brasil no té una densitat com la població d'Europa Occidental. Llavors, hi ha països que tenim el problema de l'envelliment, com pugui ser Espanya, Japó, etc. Vull dir que les situacions demogràfiques són diverses. Un cas concret, Xina ja té o tindrà un problema d'envelliment de la població. Som 7.800 milions de persones, si no estic mal entès, 8.000 està al caure, i hi ha qui diu que el planeta Terra dona per 10.000 milions de persones. Per què? Perquè el problema de la fam no és un problema de producció, sinó és un problema de distribució. El problema de l'aigua, 3/4 del mateix. I això també està relacionat amb tot un problema de desigualtat social. Qui té els recursos, qui mana, qui no mana. La juguesca és... Perquè, és a dir, hi haurà, crec jo, unes inèrcies. La inèrcia del canvi climàtic, encara que hi posem remei, la inèrcia segueix. La inèrcia del creixement demogràfic seguirà perquè hi ha països on la població està concentrada en les edats fèrtils. Vaig a la pregunta. Vostè considera que l'horitzó dels 10.000 milions de persones, tinguent en compte aquestes dues inèrcies, és factible? Sí o no? Gràcies.
Quart d'hora per acabar, dèiem 7:45, més o menys. Sí? Per tant, podem fer alguna pregunta més, llavors the idea is to make some questions and then you can answer. So the idea is we can collect some questions and then you can answer to different questions. But I think that you need a paper to remember the questions.
Two, three questions.
Yeah. The first one would be on population. Teníem aquí darrere i no aquí davant. Okay.
Good afternoon. Congratulations on the presentation. The question is addressed to Mr. Arnau Queralt. I like very much your comment on the topic that some European policies and laws are not quite effective as we expect as practitioners. Well, I'm an adjunct professor in the field of space law and maritime law. I've been working with the Marine Strategy Framework Directive for several years. And the example I have from that directive is that directive set the year 2020 as a year to have a global status, a good environmental status. What's your opinion on this? Do you have any input? And the other question is addressed to Mr. Behnassi, please. What do you think of the use of technology such as satellites and drones, you know, all these new coming actors to protect the environment? And if you could provide us with an example you consider. Thank you very much.
Perfecte. And then a third one here. Okay, we have... Tenim dues més. Let's do something. If you want, we can... There are 3 questions. Okay, so we start with one here. And then farem aquestes preguntes. Va, farem tres. Aquesta serà la tercera pregunta, respondrem i llavors respondrem a les dues preguntes, la teva i la Antoine.
Thank you very much for such an insightful presentation you have both given this evening. My question is for Mr. Behnassi, yes, okay. As a peace activist that I am, I represent a peace organization here in Catalonia who works in disarmament campaigns and who is doing lots of advocacy work to make the Spanish government, the central government, to sign the disarmament treaties, which would so much help in gaining what we understand globally as human security. Because when you were describing the concept of human security, you also mentioned to be free from fear of wars. So for us, working for human security as opposed to armed security is very important. And my question is, how could we relate and work together with the changing priorities and focusing on human security as a whole, which means social justice and global justice, as his question was also addressed, could help not to stop climate change, because I'm quite pessimistic and I think that cannot be stopped, but at least slow down the impacts and the negative effects. If we actually work together to make a shift from armed security and use all these resources to help, for example, MENA countries and the global south, who are going to be the first recipients of the impacts of climate change. So that would be my question. How can this be put forward in those conferences for, you know, like the COP27, to invite, as you said, I would say that we've got the responsibility, invite, you know, the powers, the economic powers to change their priorities, if we really want to see any noticeable change in that sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Drew.
Okay,
so
thank you.
we can answer these 2 questions, and then we have the 2 last questions but we can start with the first.
Yeah, and question for you too.
Okay.
Okay, I am very happy that this dialogue has stimulated the many questions from the audience in interactive way. let's start by the first question. I think that climate change has managed to stimulate new forms of thinking or regenerate some old thinking like Malthusian approach, okay, and the Malthusian theory. There is a new Malthusian theory that said that demographic growth is one of the drivers of climate change. So if we want to reverse the problem, we have to consider demography as a solution, a possible solution. In my opinion, and this is maybe not just a scientific point of view, but sometimes it's linked to your convictions. We know that when we mention the population growth as a problem, in most cases, we are speaking about the global south. We are not speaking about the global north. In most cases, implicitly or indirectly, we are meaning the global south. But let's think in quantitative way. We know that the environmental footprint and carbon footprint of Western countries or Western population is huge, or are huge compared to the environmental and carbon footprint of population in the South. If we refer to global justice, including climate justice, and we redistribute this potential, I think it entails one of the good solutions to climate crisis, to redistribute the emission potential in a just way. This is the first, my first element of answer. The second element is that perceiving climate change as a demographic issue is more subjective than objective. And this is why during the multilateral climate process, negotiation process, there is a huge, there is a lack of compromise between the global north and the global south about, for instance, the carbon credits and this market, how to distribute this potential over countries. For instance, China, India have called for considering the per capita potential instead of the what we call the domestic income, the national domestic income capita. So even in the negotiation process, this kind of considerations have caused a mismatch between the positions of the global north countries and the global south countries. And so much decisions taken so far are unjust, in my opinion, because they didn't refer to climate justice and the redistribution of the carbon emission potential of the planet. So it's a political issue. And in my opinion, a planet with 10 billion people can be sustainable. Let's talk about the access to food. The current food crisis and also the last food crisis in 2007-2008, they are not linked to a shortage of food, a problem of food production. Because what is produced now as food in the global term are sufficient to feed all people in the world in very acceptable ways. But it's problem of access, distribution, problem of governance, etc. And we don't also forget that a large part of the food, instead of going to human consumption, is dedicated to other uses like biofuel production, some industrial processes, etc. So, food is linked to water. That means if we redistribute food in just and equitable way, we can also redistribute water in equitable way. So it's not a question of resource scarcity or food scarcity, and managing demographic increase in the future by shifting to global justice will keep the planet in a certain limit of sustainability. But in the meantime, it will be irrational from our side to defend an ongoing demographic growth without any limits or limitations. It should be rationalized in different countries because scientifically speaking, we are starting to reach some tipping point in terms of resource availability, in terms of ecological balances. So we have to manage our demography in line with the capacity of the planet to sustain this growth in the future. But for the time being, it's not a problem of demographic growth. So another question posed by...
How many minutes do, until what time you can stay here?
Okay.
You are the organizer, so we are going to... How many? 10 minutes.
Yeah, very quickly, the question about technology. There are many technologies which are controversial because they are affecting human security, human rights, the right to privacy, and to keep our freedoms untouched by this kind by the manipulation of these technologies for other purposes. But technology is not something very negative in itself. For instance, many scientists in the agriculture areas, scientific areas, are developing now what we call climate smart agriculture to adapt agriculture with climate risks. And one of the main components of this approach is technology, how to invent and to create new technologies that can help the agricultural sector to cope and to adapt with climate risk in a very sustainable and resilient way. So technology is just a tool. It's the way we are using it that should be questioned.
Okay. So regarding your question, if you want, can I talk with you just because perhaps it's specific on the European agenda. Perhaps you can give the floor to other people, but don't worry. At the end, we can talk about it.
I will interact with her personally. Don't care after the session. No problem.
So we have, two more questions there and here. So we can start here.
Parlaré en català, o sigui que...
Perfecte.
Bona tarda, em dic Adrià Rubinat, merci als exponents. Soc estudiant de Relacions Internacionals a la UAB. Estic bastant interessat en el tema sobretot dels refugiats climàtics i sobretot també quina alternativa tenen les regions agràries que no es poden dedicar al 100% com ho feien a les explotacions agràries i ramaderes. Llavors la meva pregunta seria quines alternatives hi ha per a aquestes regions per no veure's abocades a una migració cap a les ciutats i posteriorment, si es donés el cas, cap al nord global. Merci. Gràcies.
I aquí davant. Aquí.
Just to conclude this dialogue that was entitled On the Road to COP27, I would like to know what are your expectations both of you, one from the north, one from the south, on the COP27 that will take place in humanitarian countries in 10 days.
Okay.
Thank you.
You can start with the first answer, with the
Okay.
first question, and then we go to the COP.
Okay. Yeah? Climate refugees or refugee as a concept is still the subject of scientific debate. But in the policy arena, it's still rejected, a concept rejected by decision makers in many scales. Even if the United Nations organizations that are involved in this area are starting to be more receptive, are starting to accept the discourse about climate refugees. But the problem is that so far it's difficult to include this concept in international law. Very difficult. Why? Because it is faced with a certain resistance from many countries, especially from the global north. One of the main arguments given by this country is that climate refugee principle will be a new source of responsibilities and a burden for the global north, and also it can be a way to legitimate or to accept new forms of migrations that we can't master, we can't control. So, if you remember the last migration crisis from Syria to Europe, it can be given as an example because it's very difficult to distinguish between a climate refugee and a terrorist and a political refugee. There is still a certain confusion in making distinction between this status of refugees. But on the ground, I think there are many NGOs, many scientists, and many social movements, and also many programs funded by donors and also United Nations that are trying to manage this kind of migrations in many parts of the world because there are factual events that are triggering this kind of migration in Pakistan, in Syria, in Sahel, and in some regions that are victims of extreme events. So how can we manage this emergent phenomenon in a context characterized by a normative gap on international level and also on domestic levels? In many countries, we don't have policies or laws regarding this kind of migration. Okay. But it is ongoing, and things can move further because, first of all, the IPCC report started to mention it in last report. Many security organizations started to make assessments and to produce reports on this emerging phenomenon. So I think in the future, the international community should develop a framework to manage these new forms of human displacement. And regarding the last question, personally, I am more or less in line with the agenda of the COP27 presidency. I have read their agenda and I discovered that they are focusing mostly on moving to actions because we have already taken decisions regarding objectives, how to, the different kind of responses, the needs in terms of funding, who should do this and who should do that. So now I think we have to move to actions, and these actions should be oriented to meet the needs of the global south. That's why, for instance, Egypt is defending, for instance, a huge investment in resilience and indirectly investing in adaptation. Egypt is considering the gap in terms of adaptation funding a huge problem to be tackled during the COP27. There are also a group of countries who are defending the activation of the loss and damage principle, which has been mentioned in the Paris Agreement, but the modalities of implementing this principle are still missing. And also the need to give to climate justice new forms of implementation, because so far it's just principle, but the countries in the global south are waiting for some tangible actions that are oriented toward the fostering of global climate justice.
Okay. Then, from the Mediterranean point of view, I think that one of in the COP there will be something interesting from my side, which is that the Mediterranean will have a pavilion, a specific pavilion on the Mediterranean, which is also makes sense with the idea that in the last IPCC report there was for the first time some specific chapters on the Mediterranean. So the Mediterranean, which is a hot spot in terms of climate change, appears, has a space in the IPCC report as a specific, a very sensitive area, a very vulnerable area, and there will be also a space for joint reflection, for joint action in the Med Pavilion. Then the issue is what will happen in the Med Pavilion. There are many side events there will be, but at the end it's putting the Mediterranean from a political point of view and from let's say, it's important to position the Mediterranean there. For me, this is an important point. Regarding one of the points that we had in Glasgow, that at the end, all the commitments were, what we saw in Glasgow, and I think that we are losing people. So I will ask, I will answer your question only to you because we are losing everyone. The point is, the progress that was, let's say, shown by member states in Glasgow was quite weak. And there was the idea, okay, go home and let's review what your commitments and let's put more ambitious commitments that are able to, that will help us to limit the increase in temperature. According to what was agreed in Paris in 2015, that when we take a look, when we collect and we put together all the emissions, including in the NDCs, we discover that our emissions, that's the committed emissions, don't allow to control our emissions at the level of the that is needed to keep the global temperature, the mean temperature at the global level below the 2 Celsius degrees before the pre-industrial time. What we'll see there in the COP, I don't know, the situation between Glasgow and now is that there has been a crisis, for instance, in Ukraine, and some governments are going there is different, I mean, there is a shift to renewables, but at the end, some governments are deciding to come back to coal, and this is in Europe, etc., in order to make sure that the economies and society continue working. So at the end, I think that we will see this controversy, this difference between what it should be expected in order to reach to limit the global temperature and the practicality of the daily life. So I think that I'm interested in knowing what let's say the coherence between what was approved in Paris in 2015, which was difficult to be achieved, and the situation post the global crisis we have now. I'm quite, frankly speaking, let's say, I don't expect too much from this.
Skeptical?
I am skeptical, let's say it like this. I'm quite skeptical about what's going on, which is totally against it's against the principle of acting in order to protect human security, etc. And I think that we are going to see how economy and the continuity of the current economic model I mean, that we are going to see how the pragmatism goes against the need of limiting climate change. We can have dinner after the COP, and if this happens, I will invite you. I think that we are going to see this. But at the same time, we are living in a situation where there is the development of renewables in order to limit climate change, but at the same time we have still the roots. Well, we are rooted also in the old model with the coal, the gas, etc. So we will see. I think that we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 people in the room, more or less. So I propose you. It is not because of us. It is not because of you. But I think I would propose to end here the debate. I think that we need to talk with you. I would like to end by thanking you for being here, for sharing with us all your views. You remember me that I need to send some information to the authors of the report on the Nexus. I am the one in that always in red. Thank you for remembering this. And I would also like to thank the organizers for the invitation. I think that we have a lot of challenges still to be solved, and hopefully by putting human security at the center of the decision makers, we will see some changes in policy making, and also on the perception of climate change for society, So thank you, gracias, i siguem valents i continuem treballant, diguem-ne, per canviar una miqueta aquest món.